is the second half of the rest of the readings for September 21st. Pastor David and I thought maybe we'd be a little shorter. We weren't. But in order to help, if you just want to listen to the gospel lesson, or if you just want to listen to the epistle lesson, we've split these videos apart to make it a little shorter. So now the rest of the readings with 1 Timothy chapter 2. Our texts, though, today don't really connect well. There's not a good segue to go from really many of these texts in general, other than to just kind of go, well, the epistle lesson is 1 Timothy chapter 2.
Yeah. This is part of that where it's Old Testament and the gospel will parallel.
Yeah.
There'll kind of be that theme of, wealth and materialism. And then we're just reading through 1 and 2 Timothy and there's no connection. So it's just one of those. Yeah. Okay. Now we shift gears and we'll talk about Paul's letter to Timothy.
Yeah. And so as Paul's writing to Timothy here in chapter 2, really kind of this focus in this chapter is really starting to kind of look at kind of the organization and order of public worship.
Yeah.
As he's left Timothy in Ephesus, he's kind of trying to help this young pastor out on what should things look like, how should things kind of be ordered, give things a good structure and order. And really his first point is prayer.
Yeah.
What's the first and one of the most important parts of what we're doing when we get together? And he focuses first in on prayer and kind of notes that, as he kind of comments about requests, prayers, intercession, thanksgiving, like everything that we can possibly think of, we should be bringing these things to God.
I think it's sometimes difficult for us who have grown up in the church and gone to church and have, especially, the Lutheran worship hasn't changed much over the years, to remember Paul is talking in mission context where you've got Gentiles who have no worship background at all. The Jews have the synagogue worship, which again, structure similar to our worship today, but you've got Gentiles who have no clue. And so if you talk to somebody who goes into an area where it is, not only do you bring people to faith, but now you have to teach them how to worship because they've never done this before.
Yeah, or if they have, they've been doing it in a pagan setting, and Paul's going, we're different. Like what we do is not going to be based upon what the culture around us is doing, but rather this is how we worship the true God, and we're not gonna try to look like everybody else around us just to look like the culture.
Yeah.
Which, as he's doing this, though, he's also then pointing out that some of what we do, we also, like going back to the prayer, we pray for everybody.
Yeah.
Like, and he makes that pretty clear right off the bat in verse 2. Like, it's also for the kings, which at that time is Nero. Not exactly the Roman king you want to be praying for. It's really easy. It'd be really easy for him to just kind of go, don't worry about the people that don't disagree, that disagree with us, that don't like us, that are persecuting us. We're not going to pray for them.
Yeah, this is not just a pray for the good people. It's pray for everyone, especially evil rulers that we have right now.
Yeah. Because he says we want to pray for those that may be in political power, even if we maybe don't like them. In our setting here in the United States, we might even go, I didn't vote for them, but they're my governor, they're my president, they're my congressperson, they're whatever role they are in. And even if we go, we didn't vote for them. But Paul makes the point, we want to be praying and interceding for these people simply for the fact that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness.
Yeah.
Like, I may disagree with a politician, but I am hoping and praying that they are going to do their job well in order that we as a people and as a nation would end up having some semblance of peace, and that things would go well for us.
One of the reasons why we do have that ongoing prayer in our Sunday prayers of we pray for our leaders.
Yeah.
That's part of we're doing what Paul is telling us to do here, that we're asking for good and godly leaders, or for the leaders we have to make good and godly decisions that lead to that peacefulness. So that, again, the blessings we have that we can share our faith, live openly when you talk to those who live in countries where that freedom is not there, then yeah, it is so much more difficult where we can live peaceful lives, compared to those who are facing martyrdom. We have nothing holding us back.
Yeah, and so jumping down a couple more verses, like kind of one of the things that separates kind of Protestants from the Catholic faith is we don't pray to saints.
Right.
And part of that reason there is within verse 5, because we already have a mediator. We've got the one who goes in between us. We've got a direct access to Jesus. Paul tells us that we can pray to him. He's the one who's taken it all for us. So we can go directly to Jesus as our mediator. And then Paul kind of moves from there into kind of pointing out that I think once again he kind of has to defend his own apostleship a little bit, because he makes the comment again in verse 7 that he's been appointed to do this. Mm-hmm. But we know that there are those other believers around them that are still kind of questioning, are you really one of us? Like, should you even be one of us because of your history? And so Paul's kind of defending himself there, and then he moves into a little bit more of kind of what we look at as challenging verses within today's culture, because within our culture we end up having people look at the church oftentimes and going, well, you don't really like women because
You're
of the
sexist.
things that Paul says. But that's really not the point of what Paul is doing, because he's even being countercultural within his own era here.
Very definitely. Yeah, the view of the Greek culture, the pagan culture toward women, and even coming from the Jewish background, that women were second class.
Yeah. They really, with the way Paul ends up talking about women and really the commands as well that he gives to the church about how we are to interact with one another, because there's the commands that husbands need to be loving their wives and taking care of them. It really kind of elevates women within the Christian community out of this role of being a second-class citizen or being more looked at as like a possession, to being we are equals within the church. But Paul goes, we do have different roles.
Vocation.
And so not every role is meant for every person. And Paul does make that distinction by gender here as well, which, within our hiring practices of the 21st century, we would go, you can't do that.
Right.
But Paul makes a distinction here, just as in the Old Testament, between the 12 tribes, one tribe gets singled out.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 11 tribes don't get to throw a fit over, well, we want to be priests too, but it's just the Levites that are brought into that part of the job of, you've got to be in the temple, you've got to be in the tabernacle. This is your role. And so this is where Paul kind of comes in and says, here's kind of our differences in our role. And in part of it, he is speaking a little bit to the culture in Ephesus and kind of what's going on, especially in verses 9 and 10 when he's talking about he wants women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, not with braided hair or gold and pearls or expensive clothes. He's not saying that women can't come to church with their hair braided, with earrings in or whatnot. But what Paul's noticing in the culture of that day is all of these things are really kind of signs of vanity and immorality, and so Paul's kind of pushing against this sexual promiscuity here to go, this isn't how we as Christians live. And he's also kind of going the costly attire sort of thing. Like, there was stuff that was really expensive by their means. So like 7,000 denarii would be possibly what some of their clothing would have cost. And when you put that into context, at least you're kind of going, well, one denarius is a day's wage. So 7,000 days worth of wages is what some of them are paying for this stuff, and just living lavishly rather than kind of helping one another. So Paul's not condemning all of these things, but rather he's pointing out the excess and the immorality that tends to be conveyed through them. So he's trying to kind of put boundaries on things to go, here's where we should be, rather than saying, we can't have nice things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Paul will do the same thing in talking to the Corinthians about their failures in worship, how they're reflecting the culture in their worship rather than reflecting Christ. So it is, as Paul is trying to say, yeah, that may be true of what you're used to out in the world, but not in the church, not as you gather for worship. These things are out of place because they reflect the values of the world, not the values of Christ.
Yeah, and then the verses that tend to be the ones that get people the angriest and most upset are verses 11 through 15, because we have folks that'll hear a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. They don't permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. She must be silent. These tend to go countercultural within our culture, within kind of the feminism movement and things like that, saying, well, women should be able to do. And it's not to degrade women and say, you need to show up to church, but be quiet.
Right.
It's based upon the created order rather than upon the culture of the day. Mm-hmm. And so Paul doesn't appeal, because he could have appealed to the culture of the day and been like, well, if we look at everybody else around us, this is all taking place.
This is what they're doing, yeah.
But rather, Paul's going, there is an order in which God created us, and because of that, there are certain roles that each of us have. And so when he then points out in verse 13 and 14, Adam was formed first, then Eve. Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived. He's not saying, well, it's not Adam's fault that we have a sinful world. That's not his point at all.
No.
He's going, it's two different types of sin that end up kind of taking place. Eve is deceived by Satan, and then Adam kind of willingly goes along with it when Eve hands him the fruit. He could have said no, and he should have said no, but he didn't.
Right. He should have said, no, God said we're not free to eat from this tree. We can eat from any other tree. Let's go eat over there. He failed to do that, and so, he was led into sin. And I think even, where Paul takes us back to Adam and Eve and the sin, and then immediately we go to women saved through childbearing, and immediately we should think of Genesis 3:15, where God gives the promise of the seed of the woman overcoming, Satan. So that's where that promise comes, that saved through childbearing. It's like that was the promise given to Eve, that a woman would give birth. And so that's, we know, Galatians 4, in the fullness of time, God sent his son, born of a woman.
Yeah.
So it's all part of that, the salvation theme echoed through, that the woman, it was through her that salvation was promised, that the one would be born of a woman. Mary gives birth to Jesus. God's son is born to us.
Yeah. And so much ink has been spilled within the Lutheran Church, especially kind of on the topic of women and men and their roles in the congregation. And as you move into chapter 3, Paul starts leaning into kind of what are the qualifications for pastors and elders and things like that. But once again, we still see there are very important roles for women within the church. And so while one role may be blocked to say God has said this is how we're going to structure the church, it's not to say that women are second-class citizens within the church, but rather there are extremely important roles that women are still able to do, that need to do. Yeah. And we end up still having women as teachers. So where Paul says women, he's not permitting a woman to teach, that's not the case of like women can't teach at all.
Bible study right
Paul's just talking here about corporate worship in the sense of being the pastor, of being the one up in the front. But we see well-equipped, well-instructed, great Lutheran women being able to lead tremendous Bible studies within the church, even within our own church here, to be able to go, we've got some great Bible studies going on, and by wonderfully faithful women that really know their stuff too. So once again, what we don't want to be the takeaway from chapter 2 is that Paul and the church hates women. That's not the point
Yeah.
We're focusing on what are our different vocations, what are the different God-ordained roles based upon created order.
And unfortunately, that's where we have that chapter break that makes it separate, where Paul didn't write with any chapters and verses, so he immediately went from a woman should learn, and do not permit a woman to teach. Then he starts talking about who should teach. He immediately rolls into, here's what anybody wants to set his heart to be an overseer, desires a noble task. Here's the responsibilities you have as the one who is able to teach. That's one of the responsibilities, or one of the characteristics that Paul lists there for those who are to be the pastors or overseers of worship.
Yeah. So that's where we're going to wrap this up today, and we'll leave it for those of you that are watching and listening you can come to the screen, take a look at the questions that are there to be able to see how you might dig deeper in if you're doing this with your small group, or if you're listening to this at home on your own, or just with husband and wife, however this might be working for you. Take a few moments to look through those questions, maybe see how else you can dig into God's Word, and we'll take a look at next week's readings when we come back next week.